All right, welcome to the Explainer. You know, we spend a lot of time looking at numbers on a screen, but today we're going to go deeper. We are unpacking the absolutely wild story of a single stock because it tells us so much about the powerful forces. We're talking hope, fear, and of course the fundamentals that can make or totally break a company's value in the market.
So here's the big question, the mystery we're really digging into today. How does a stock that everyone loves, a real star, suddenly just crash? And then even more incredibly, how does it skyrocket right back up? We're going to use the amazing journey of a defense tech company called AeroVironment, that's ticker AVAV, to figure it all out.
And wow, just look at this. This V shape right here, it basically tells the entire story in one simple picture. You've got this steep, absolutely terrifying fall, and then boom, an even more incredible, almost gravity-defying comeback. So the big question is, how in the world does something like this even happen?
Okay, first up, a star on the rise, the promise of a defense tech innovator. You know, to really get why it crashed so hard, we first have to understand why it was flying so high in the first place. So let's rewind a bit and see what made AVAV such a hot stock with investors. So, who is AeroVironment? Well, before this whole roller coaster ride started, they were a serious powerhouse. I mean, this wasn't just some other tech company. These guys were and are at the absolute cutting edge. We're talking about the company building the high-tech drones, the tactical missile systems, basically the stuff that is literally redefining modern warfare.
And when you look at the why, it's pretty clear why investors were so bullish. I mean, check this out. They had key contracts with the U.S. Department of Defense and NATO. That's huge. They had a reputation for being the leader in their field, just top-notch tech. A strong R&D pipeline meant more cool stuff was on the way. And on top of all that, the whole world was starting to use more and more drones. It just looked like a can't-miss opportunity. And yeah, that stock price just kept climbing.
All right, next section. The unexpected nosedive when optimism meets reality. Here's the thing though, when you have that much optimism, that much hype, it creates a massive vulnerability. It's like you're walking a tightrope. If expectations are way up here, it only takes one tiny disappointment to trigger a huge fall. And well, that is exactly what was about to happen.
And then, bam. All of a sudden, headlines just like this started flashing everywhere. All that incredible upward momentum that had been building for months, gone. It reversed in like an instant. The stock was in a total free fall, just plummeting. We're talking about a massive, massive drop. In a crazy short amount of time, a huge piece of the company's value just vanished. Poof, gone. So this brings us back to that crucial question, right? What on earth could cause such a dramatic collapse? I mean, just days before, this company seemed totally solid.
So it turns out it wasn't just one single thing. It was basically a perfect storm of bad news. First, you get an earnings disappointment. Maybe they missed what the analysts were expecting, or they lowered their outlook for the future. That's the spark. Then, you might have some broader market jitters. Maybe the whole tech sector was having a bad day. But the real gasoline on the fire, that was just raw human emotion. Pure fear. Panic selling started, everyone rushed for the exits at once, and that just pushed the price down way further, way faster.
All right, Section 3, the psychology of panic. Emotion versus logic in the market. And that whole panic selling thing we just talked about, it's the perfect example of how powerful our own psychology can be in the market. You know, a stock's price isn't always about neat and tidy spreadsheets and forecasts. A lot of the time, especially in the short term, it's driven way more by basic human emotions like fear and greed.
And right in the middle of that crash, you could see two totally different mindsets at play. On one side, you have the short-term traders. They see the price dropping, they see the scary headlines, and they react. They sell, they get out, trying to avoid losing even more money. And of course, all that selling just makes the drop worse. But on the other side, you've got the long-term investors. They're trying to look past all that noise and asking a much simpler, more important question. Okay, but has the company itself actually changed?
Yeah, and this quote from a market analyst just hits the nail on the head. Emotional reactions can cause temporary price dislocations even for quality companies. Now that term price dislocation is just a fancy way of saying the stock price has gotten completely disconnected from what the company is actually worth. The fear in the market was all about the here and now, the short-term panic. It was totally ignoring the reality of AVAV's long-term contracts and its leading position in the industry.
Okay, on to the next chapter, the turning point. How the recovery began. Because here's the good news. Panic doesn't last forever, right? Eventually, logic starts to find its way back into the room.
And that creates a turning point. So let's take a look at how this recovery actually got started and what fueled that amazing rebound we saw back on that V-shaped chart. So the comeback didn't just happen out of nowhere. It wasn't random at all. It was driven by a series of very real events that forced the market to start looking at the fundamentals again. So first up, boom, they announced new military contracts. That's a huge reminder of the company's core business. Next, they release a new earnings report, and it's a good one, proving the business is still strong. And then you have things happening out in the world, geopolitical shifts that actually increase demand for the very drone systems they make. Suddenly, the whole story, the narrative, starts to shift away from panic and back towards value.
All right, last section here. Lessons from the rebound, the disciplined investor's playbook. You know, this whole wild ride is way more than just a good story. It's actually a really powerful lesson. So let's break it down. What can the journey of this one stock teach all of us about how to navigate the chaos of the market?
So here it is, the playbook. The number one takeaway is that having a disciplined approach is your best defense against getting caught up in the panic. What does that mean? First, focus on the fundamentals. Look at the company itself, not just the squiggly line of its stock price. Second, you have to accept that volatility is just part of the game. Even the best companies can have really sharp drops. Third, practice patience. The long game can really pay off for people who can just wait out the panic. And maybe most important of all, learn to see the opportunity. Sometimes a big market overreaction is just a chance to buy a fantastic company on sale.
And that really is the final question, isn't it? When the market starts to panic, what are you going to see? Will you see a crisis, or will you see an opportunity? Because if the story of AVAV teaches us anything, it's that in the wild world of investing, they can be two sides of the very same coin. And which one you end up seeing? Well, that all comes down to your perspective.